Cowboy inherits dying Apache leader's two beautiful wives, and what happened after that was, Jake had spent most of his life riding across the wide open plains, a cowboy in the truest sense of the word. He knew the land like the back of his hand, the dusty trails, the hidden water holes, the places where wild horses grazed and where the weather could change without warning. His life had always been about survival, about moving from one town to the next, one job to the next, without ever staying in one place too long. He liked it that way. There was freedom in solitude, in knowing that the horizon stretched endlessly ahead, and that nobody could tell him what to do. One morning, Jake found himself riding further west than he ever had before. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. He had heard whispers from other travelers about a small Apache village hidden in the hills, a place few outsiders visited. Some said the people there were wary of strangers. Others spoke of a respected leader who had kept peace in the area for many years. Jake was curious. A part of him, the part that had always been drawn to adventure, wanted to see it for himself. After hours of riding over rough terrain, he finally arrived at the village. It was smaller than he expected, with simple huts built from wood and mud, smoke curling gently from the chimneys. Children ran barefoot through the dirt paths, laughing and playing with wooden toys. Women were busy with daily chores, tending fires, preparing food, and weaving fabrics with incredible skill. The village had a quiet beauty, a sense of harmony that struck Jake immediately. Despite his rugged exterior, he felt a rare sense of calm. As he entered the village square, Jake noticed the people staring at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He dismounted slowly, tipping his hat in greeting. He spoke in the common language of the frontier, explaining that he was a traveler looking for work and a place to rest. The villagers murmured among themselves, their expressions guarded. It was clear they were not used to strangers. Yet, after a few tense moments, an elderly man with a commanding presence approached him. This was the Apache leader, and even in his weakened state, he carried the authority of someone who had earned the respect of his people over decades. The leader looked Jake up and down, his eyes sharp despite the illness that slowed his movements. Jake could sense that the man was assessing him, trying to determine if he was trustworthy. Finally, in a voice that was calm but firm, the leader spoke. He invited Jake to sit near the fire, offering him a simple meal of bread and roasted meat. Jake accepted, grateful for the hospitality, but also aware that this was more than a casual gesture. He sensed that he was entering a situation far more serious than just visiting a village. Over the next few hours, Jake learned bits of the leader's story. The man had spent his entire life guiding his people, maintaining traditions, and keeping the village safe from external threats. But now, age and illness had caught up with him. His strength was fading, and he worried about what would happen to his family and community when he was gone. Jake listened quietly, realizing that he had stumbled into a moment of deep significance. He was a stranger, yet here he was, being included in conversations that were normally reserved for family and trusted advisors. Then came the moment that would change Jake's life forever. The leader, speaking with the honesty and clarity of someone who knew his time was short, made a request that Jake could hardly believe. He asked Jake to take responsibility for his two wives after he was gone. The request was shocking and confusing. Jake had never imagined himself in such a role, and the idea of inheriting the care of another man's family seemed overwhelming. Yet, the leader's tone left no room for refusal. It was not just a request, it was a serious responsibility, an honor, and a test of character all at once. At first, Jake did not know how to respond. He looked at the leader, then at the women, Maria and Lita, who were quietly observing the conversation from a short distance. They were both striking in appearance, with eyes that reflected strength, intelligence, and a deep understanding of the world around them. Yet there was sadness there too, a reflection of the loss they were already beginning to feel. Jake realized that he was not simply being asked to provide shelter. He was being asked to honor a legacy, to respect a family, and to navigate a culture very different from his own. The leader spoke again, explaining why he trusted Jake. He had noticed the cowboy's courage, his honesty, and the way he treated others with respect despite his solitary lifestyle. He believed that Jake had the qualities necessary to ensure that his family would be cared for, and that his village would remain stable after his passing. Jake felt a mixture of pride, fear, and responsibility. He was honored, but also acutely aware of how difficult this task would be. He knew that earning the trust of Maria and Lita would not be easy, nor would it be simple to live in a community that had its own rules, traditions, and expectations. Over the next few days, Jake began to learn more about the two women he would now be responsible for. Maria was calm and thoughtful, always speaking with a quiet confidence. Lita was lively and intelligent, quick to smile but equally quick to express her opinions. Both women were skilled in the ways of the village. They managed households, prepared medicines from local herbs, and guided younger villagers in important tasks. Jake realized that he was entering a partnership, not a simple caretaking role. Respect and patience would be his only tools if he wanted to succeed. Jake also spent time exploring the village and observing its routines. He noticed how every member of the community had a role, how every action contributed to the collective well-being. He had never lived in a place with such interdependence. In his life as a cowboy, he had been independent, relying on his own skills to survive. Now he would have to adjust, to learn how to work alongside others and to earn their respect through actions, not just words. He understood that this was not about dominance or control, but about cooperation and understanding. The first night Jake stayed in the village, he lay awake thinking about the road ahead. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but also a strange sense of purpose he had never experienced before. The lives of Maria and Lita, the legacy of the Apache leader, and the future of the village were now intertwined with his own path. Jake realized that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The open plains, the solitude he had cherished, and the freedom of a wandering life were giving way to a new chapter, one that required courage, empathy, and wisdom, beyond anything he had faced as a lone cowboy. By the next morning, Jake was determined to face the challenge with an open heart. He greeted the women, offering help with chores and showing a willingness to learn. At first, they were cautious, watching his actions carefully. But Jake understood that trust could only be built over time. Small acts of kindness, patience in learning their ways, and genuine respect for their culture would be his path forward. He knew mistakes would happen, but he also knew that sincerity mattered more than perfection. As days turned into weeks, Jake began to form a rhythm with Maria and Lita. They taught him their customs, showed him the ways of the village, and shared stories of their lives with the Apache leader. Jake listened attentively, absorbing not just the instructions for daily life, but also the values and traditions that shaped their world. He started to feel less like an outsider and more like someone who had been entrusted with an important mission. The initial shock of inheritance gave way to understanding, and the fear of failure slowly transformed into determination. Jake's presence also brought subtle changes to the village. Villagers noticed the cowboy's efforts to respect their culture, and some began to see him as a bridge between two worlds, the rugged frontier and the rich traditions of the Apache people. While trust was not immediate, small gestures, shared meals, and moments of mutual understanding began to form a foundation. Jake realized that this was not just about caring for two women. It was about participating in a community, learning and contributing in ways he had never done before. By the end of the first month, Jake felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had survived the initial challenge of entering the village, earning the respect of its residents, and beginning to build a relationship with Maria and Lita. He knew there would be more trials ahead, that the journey of responsibility was just beginning. But for the first time in his wandering life, he felt a connection, not to a place, but to people, to history, and to a future that depended on courage, empathy, and commitment. And so, what began as a chance encounter with a dying Apache leader had set Jake on a path he never could have imagined. A path that would test him, teach him, and ultimately transform him. The cowboy who had always walked alone was learning that some of life's greatest adventures were not found in the open plains, but in the hearts and lives of those he had been asked to protect. Life in the Apache village was not easy for Jake at first. He had entered this world as an outsider, a cowboy with no knowledge of their traditions, and suddenly he was responsible for two women who had lived their whole lives in a completely different culture. Maria and Lita were cautious around him, and Jake understood why. They had lost a husband, a leader, and a protector, and now a stranger had been placed in the center of their lives. He knew he would have to earn their trust, not through words but through his actions. The first days were quiet, almost tense. Jake helped with chores and tried to follow the routines the women had established, but he often made mistakes. He mixed up the order of tasks, misunderstood instructions, and sometimes acted too quickly without understanding the traditions behind them. Maria would correct him gently, explaining why certain steps were important. Lita was more straightforward, pointing out when he had made a mistake. At first, Jake felt frustrated with himself, but he soon realized that patience and humility would be essential if he wanted to succeed in his new role. Slowly, Jake began to learn the rhythms of the village. He noticed the early morning calls to gather food, the way the women prepared meals using herbs and ingredients he had never seen before, and how they interacted with the children and elders. It was not just about completing tasks. It was about understanding a way of life that had been built over generations. Jake was careful to observe and listen, taking notes in his mind so that he would not repeat his mistakes. His respect for the women and their culture grew every day. Maria and Lita, too, began to observe Jake more closely. They watched how he treated the children, how he interacted with the villagers, and how he handled the animals. They saw that he was not just a man who had been given responsibility by the leader, but someone who genuinely cared. He worked tirelessly, never seeking reward or recognition. Slowly, their suspicion began to fade, replaced by cautious curiosity. They began to share stories with him, telling him about the late leader, the history of the village, and their own lives. Jake listened with fascination, realizing that he was learning lessons far beyond what he had imagined when he first arrived. The village itself was small but vibrant, full of life and activity. Jake began to notice the strength of the community and the way people relied on each other. It reminded him of his own days on the frontier, but there was a difference here. Everything in the village had meaning, from the way food was prepared to the way children were taught respect and responsibility. Jake tried to follow their lead, understanding that his role was not to change their ways, but to become part of their world while still being true to himself. Over time, Jake's presence began to affect the dynamics of the village in subtle ways. He helped where he could, whether it was repairing a fence, assisting in hunting, or protecting the village from small dangers. The villagers noticed that he respected their customs and did not act as an intruder. Maria and Lita began to see him as more than just a caretaker. They began to see him as a partner, someone who could share responsibilities and offer support when needed. It was a slow process, built on small gestures, patience, and mutual respect. One day, Jake accompanied Maria to gather herbs in the hills outside the village. The journey was quiet at first, with both of them focusing on the task at hand. As they walked, Maria began to speak about her late husband, about the lessons he had taught her and the memories she held dear. Jake listened intently, understanding that these were not just stories, but pieces of wisdom that he needed to carry forward. He shared his own experiences as a cowboy, the hardships he had faced, and the lessons he had learned from life on the open plains. In that moment, a bond began to form, built on shared experiences and understanding. Lita, too, found moments to connect with Jake. She was more adventurous and often took him to places where he could see the beauty and challenges of the land. Together, they explored hidden trails, climbed rocky hills, and discovered water sources that had been overlooked. Through these adventures, Lita shared her knowledge of survival, teaching Jake how to move quietly through the woods, how to identify edible plants, and how to read the signs of animals in the wilderness. Jake admired her courage and intelligence, and he began to feel that he was not just learning from the women, but learning to respect life in a way he never had before. Despite the growing trust, there were moments of tension. Villagers would sometimes whisper about the cowboy who had come into their lives. They questioned whether he could truly honor the legacy of the late leader, whether he understood the responsibilities he had taken on. Jake felt the weight of these doubts, knowing that he could not simply rely on his intentions. He had to show through consistent action that he was worthy of their trust. Maria and Lita stood by him during these moments, offering guidance and reminding him of the values of patience, humility, and respect. As the seasons changed, Jake began to feel a sense of belonging that he had never experienced in his wandering life. He had come to the village as a stranger, but now he was a part of its rhythms and traditions. He shared meals with the villagers, celebrated festivals, and joined in communal activities. He began to understand that family was not just about blood, but about connection, responsibility, and care. Maria and Lita were no longer just women he was responsible for. They were teachers, friends, and partners in a life that was becoming richer and more meaningful with each passing day. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Jake found himself sitting by the fire with the women. The air was cool, and the smell of burning wood filled the space. Maria spoke softly about the late leader, about his hopes for the village, and the lessons he had tried to teach them all. Lita shared stories of her childhood, of adventures in the hills, and of dreams she still held close to her heart. Jake listened, feeling a deep respect for the lives they had lived and the wisdom they carried. In that moment, he realized that he was no longer an outsider looking in. He was a part of a story much larger than himself, a story that he had the privilege and responsibility to honor. As days turned into weeks, Jake noticed changes in himself. He was learning patience, understanding, and the importance of listening. He realized that caring for the women and becoming part of the village required more than physical work. It required emotional strength, empathy, and a willingness to learn. He reflected on his past life as a cowboy, with its freedom and solitude, and he understood that while those things had been important, they had not given him the depth of connection he now felt. The responsibility he had inherited was teaching him more about life, about respect, and about love than he could have imagined. The women also grew more comfortable with Jake. Maria began asking for his opinion on matters concerning the village, while Lita shared her concerns about the upcoming season and how they could prepare. Jake realized that the trust they were placing in him was a gift, not a burden. He had the opportunity to make a real difference, to honor the legacy of the late leader, and to build a life of meaning alongside two remarkable women. Their partnership was growing, founded on mutual respect, shared responsibility, and genuine care. One morning, Jake awoke to find the village bustling with activity. The children were running to gather water, the women were preparing food, and the elders were discussing plans for the coming weeks. Jake joined in without hesitation, helping wherever he could. Maria and Lita worked alongside him, guiding him when needed, but also allowing him space to contribute in his own way. Jake felt a deep sense of purpose, realizing that this life, though challenging, was teaching him lessons he would carry for the rest of his days. By the end of the season, Jake had transformed in ways he could not have imagined. He had earned the tentative trust of the villagers, formed genuine bonds with Maria and Lita, and discovered a sense of belonging he had never experienced as a wandering cowboy. The inheritance of responsibility had begun as a daunting challenge, but it had become a path to growth, understanding, and deep human connection. He understood now that life was not just about survival. It was about respect, care, and the willingness to embrace new experiences with an open heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the village, Jake stood quietly, reflecting on the journey he had begun. He had arrived as a stranger, a cowboy passing through, but he had become part of something greater, a story of resilience, trust, and shared life. He looked at Maria and Lita, who were tending to their chores with quiet grace, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The path ahead would not always be easy, but he was ready. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way, bound by trust, respect, and the courage to embrace life as it was meant to be lived. Life in the village had settled into a rhythm, and Jake was beginning to feel like he truly belonged. He had learned the routines, earned the cautious trust of Maria and Lita, and was becoming more comfortable with the responsibilities he had inherited. But life, as Jake quickly realized, was never simple, and soon he faced challenges that tested not just his physical strength, but his character and patience as well. The first major challenge came in the form of a harsh winter. The plains were unrelenting, and the village was more exposed than any town Jake had ever seen. Snow covered the ground, making hunting difficult and slowing travel between the village and nearby forests where supplies could be found. The villagers relied heavily on the crops and dried food stored from the previous season, but it was never enough. Jake could feel the weight of responsibility more than ever. Maria and Lita were both anxious, not for themselves, but for the safety of the children and elders. Jake knew he had to step up. He organized hunting trips and guided villagers to hidden stores of food that he had discovered while exploring the surrounding lands. He repaired shelters and helped gather firewood, working long hours in the freezing cold. Maria and Lita assisted, but they also watched him carefully. Every decision mattered. One wrong move could leave someone hungry or exposed to the harsh elements. Jake learned to move strategically, to plan ahead, and to anticipate the needs of the village. He realized that survival was no longer about his own life alone. It was about the lives of everyone who depended on him. While the harsh winter tested their physical endurance, the village also faced conflicts with neighboring groups. Some outsiders viewed the small Apache village as vulnerable and sought to take advantage of its isolation. One morning, a group of travelers arrived at the edge of the village. They were not hostile at first, but they demanded resources and tried to assert authority over the community. The villagers were wary, and Jake knew that he could not act recklessly. He had to protect the village without causing unnecessary violence or panic. Jake approached the outsiders calmly, showing respect but standing firm. He spoke with reason, using his knowledge of the land and his understanding of human behavior to negotiate. The situation was tense. A wrong word could lead to conflict. Maria and Lita stayed close, offering advice and reminders about the customs and traditions of the people he now served. Jake listened and acted carefully, and eventually, the outsiders left, recognizing that the village was united and well prepared. It was a small victory, but it reinforced the importance of wisdom, patience, and diplomacy. As the days passed, Jake began to see another challenge, one that was quieter but no less significant. Some villagers were slow to trust him fully. They remembered the old leader and wondered if a cowboy could truly honor his legacy. Jake understood their skepticism. He had to prove through consistent actions, not just words, that he was worthy of the responsibility. Maria and Lita guided him in this, encouraging him to participate in community decisions, listen to concerns, and show humility. Through their guidance, Jake learned that respect was earned over time, and that leadership was not about authority, but about service. One afternoon, Jake accompanied Lita on a trip to repair a nearby water source. The path was narrow and treacherous, with frozen streams and rocky hills. Lita shared her knowledge of the terrain, pointing out safe passages and hidden dangers. As they worked together, Jake realized how much he relied on her expertise. It was no longer a matter of him simply helping the women, it was a partnership. Together, they faced challenges that neither could have handled alone, and in the process, their mutual respect and trust deepened. Maria also played a crucial role in Jake's growth. She guided him in understanding the spiritual and cultural traditions of the village, explaining rituals, ceremonies, and the importance of community values. Jake realized that to be truly accepted, he had to honor these practices, not just follow them superficially. He began participating in ceremonies with sincerity, showing reverence for customs that were foreign to him. The villagers noticed, and gradually, their cautious trust transformed into genuine acceptance. Jake was no longer seen as a stranger. He was becoming part of the fabric of their lives. Despite these successes, Jake faced personal challenges as well. He missed the freedom of his past life, the open plains, the solitude, the ability to make decisions without considering others. Sometimes he felt trapped by his responsibilities and wondered if he had made the right choice in accepting the task given by the late leader. Maria and Lita noticed these moments and offered comfort, sharing stories of the leader's wisdom and reminding him that courage was not about avoiding responsibility, but embracing it. Their words gave him strength, helping him to focus on what mattered most: the safety, happiness, and stability of the village. Another significant trial arose when the village faced a sudden shortage of food. A storm had destroyed part of the stored crops, and the supply of dried meat was running low. Panic began to spread among the villagers, and Jake felt the pressure mounting. He knew he had to act quickly. Using his knowledge of the surrounding lands, he organized a hunting and foraging expedition, bringing back food to sustain the community. He worked alongside Maria and Lita, who guided him to edible plants, safe water sources, and hidden caches left from previous seasons. Together, they managed to prevent a crisis, but Jake understood that leadership required constant vigilance and adaptability. Through these trials, Jake grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. He learned to anticipate problems before they arose, to listen to advice, and to work collaboratively. He understood that being responsible for Maria, Lita, and the village was not about dominance or control, but about empathy, understanding, and partnership. Each challenge, whether it was harsh weather, external threats, or internal doubts, taught him lessons about patience, humility, and the value of trust. The women's role in these trials was crucial. Maria provided wisdom, calm guidance, and a connection to the traditions of the village. Lita offered courage, intelligence, and practical solutions to daily challenges. Jake realized that without them, he could not have succeeded. Their partnership was not just about survival, it was about learning, growth, and mutual respect. Together, they created a strong team capable of facing the uncertainties of frontier life. By the end of this period of trials, Jake had earned the genuine respect of the villagers. They began to see him not as an outsider, but as someone who had proven his commitment through action. Children ran to greet him, elders sought his advice, and the community began to trust his decisions. Maria and Lita smiled quietly, seeing the growth in Jake and the way he had embraced his responsibilities. What began as a daunting inheritance had become a story of courage, partnership, and resilience. Jake also discovered new aspects of himself. He realized that his past experiences as a cowboy had prepared him for these challenges, but that he now needed more than survival skills. He needed emotional intelligence, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to work as part of a team. Each trial pushed him beyond his comfort zone, teaching him lessons that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He was no longer just a wanderer. He was a protector, a partner, and a valued member of a community. The challenges they faced together also strengthened the bond between Jake, Maria, and Lita. They shared long evenings discussing strategies for the village, reminiscing about the late leader, and planning for the future. Jake realized that trust and respect were not built overnight. They were nurtured through shared experiences, challenges, and triumphs. The women, in turn, saw that Jake's commitment was genuine, that he truly cared about their well-being and the future of the village. Their partnership had evolved into something deeper than responsibility. It had become a bond of friendship, respect, and shared purpose. One cold evening, after a particularly exhausting day of work, Jake sat by the fire with Maria and Lita. The snow outside had settled, and the village was quiet. They spoke of the challenges they had overcome, of the lessons they had learned, and of the future they hoped to build together. Jake felt a sense of accomplishment he had never experienced in his life as a wandering cowboy. The hardships they had faced had not only tested him, they had transformed him. He understood now that life was about more than survival. It was about connection, trust, and the courage to face challenges with integrity. As the night deepened, Jake reflected on the journey so far. The inheritance of responsibility had been unexpected and overwhelming at first, but it had taught him more about life than any frontier adventure ever could. The trials they had faced, the harsh winter, external threats, and internal doubts, had shown him the importance of partnership, respect, and courage. He realized that true strength was not measured by solitude or survival, but by the ability to care for others, to build trust, and to act with wisdom in the face of uncertainty. By the end of this challenging season, Jake had transformed in ways he could not have imagined. He was no longer just a cowboy wandering the plains. He was a protector, a partner, and a trusted member of a community. Maria and Lita had become not just the women he cared for, but his guides, teachers, and friends. Together, they had faced trials that tested every aspect of their lives, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. And so, life in the village continued, with Jake fully aware that more challenges would come. But he was ready. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. He had learned that trust was earned through consistent action, and that partnership required respect, patience, and understanding. Above all, he had learned that life was richer and more meaningful when shared with others, and that the inheritance of responsibility could be a gift, a chance to grow, and a path to true connection. After months of trials, Jake, Maria, and Lita had grown closer, their lives intertwined in ways that neither could have predicted. The village had survived harsh weather, scarce resources, and outside threats, and Jake had proven himself a capable, trustworthy figure. Yet, life was far from simple. The challenges of the frontier, combined with the responsibilities he had inherited, continued to test him in unexpected ways. This period became a turning point, shaping relationships, revealing emotions, and solidifying bonds that would last a lifetime. One morning, Jake awoke to the sound of laughter echoing across the village. Children were running through the dirt paths, chasing one another and playing games that had been passed down for generations. Maria and Lita were nearby, quietly observing but smiling at their joy. Jake realized that the village was alive in a way he had never experienced before. There was a rhythm to life here, a harmony between work, play, and care. And he, Once a lone cowboy wandering across endless plains was now a part of it. The day began like any other, with chores and tasks to complete, but Jake noticed a subtle shift in the women's behavior. Maria approached him first, speaking gently but with seriousness. "Jake," she said, "there are things we must discuss, things about the future of the village and ourselves." Lita joined them, nodding in agreement. Jake felt a mix of curiosity and concern. He understood that they were about to face a deeper level of responsibility, one that went beyond daily survival. Maria and Lita explained that while Jake had proven himself capable, leadership in the village required understanding not just physical work, but emotional care, cultural knowledge, and long-term planning. They spoke of the importance of traditions, of preserving the legacy of the late leader, and of guiding the younger generation. Jake listened intently, realizing that his role had shifted from caretaker to true partner, someone whose decisions would shape the lives of many. He felt the weight of this responsibility, but also a deep sense of purpose he had never known. That afternoon, Jake accompanied Maria to a meeting with the village elders. They discussed the upcoming season, the management of resources, and the need to maintain harmony among the villagers. Jake observed closely, learning the subtle ways in which respect was shown, how opinions were expressed without conflict, and how decisions were made with fairness. He realized that his previous life as a cowboy, while independent and adventurous, had not prepared him for this kind of leadership. It required patience, empathy, and wisdom, qualities he had begun to develop but now needed to refine. Meanwhile, Lita took Jake to meet the younger villagers, showing him the importance of teaching, guidance, and mentorship. They worked with the children on practical skills like gathering food, preparing medicinal herbs, and understanding the patterns of the land. Jake felt a deep connection to these lessons, realizing that his role was not just about providing for the women, but about contributing to the growth and well-being of the entire community. Maria and Lita watched closely, offering encouragement, corrections, and insights, ensuring that Jake's guidance would be both effective and respectful. Despite their growing bond, moments of tension remained. Some villagers still questioned Jake's place in their community. They whispered doubts, wondering if a cowboy could truly honor the legacy of their leader. Jake felt the weight of these doubts but chose not to respond with frustration. Instead, he focused on consistent action, showing through his deeds that he was committed, respectful, and sincere. Maria and Lita provided support, reminding him that trust was built over time and that the opinions of a few should not overshadow the well-being of the many. One evening, a sudden illness swept through part of the village. Children and elders fell ill, and panic began to spread. Jake immediately stepped into action, organizing care, bringing clean water, and helping Maria and Lita prepare remedies from herbs. He worked tirelessly, moving from hut to hut, offering comfort, and ensuring that everyone received attention. The villagers watched in awe as Jake's dedication and compassion became evident. For the first time, they truly saw him as someone who cared deeply, not just about survival, but about the lives and well-being of everyone around him. During this crisis, the bond between Jake and the women strengthened even further. Maria's calm wisdom guided him in treatment and care, while Lita's practical skills and quick thinking helped manage the logistics of feeding, comforting, and organizing the community. Jake realized that he had become part of a partnership built on mutual respect and trust. It was not about ownership or authority. It was about collaboration, understanding, and shared responsibility. Each action, each decision, reinforced the strength of their bond. As the days of illness passed, Jake reflected on the changes in himself. He had grown from a wandering cowboy, focused on personal freedom, into someone capable of empathy, leadership, and deep connection. He understood now that life's true challenges were not always physical, they were emotional and relational. caring for Maria and Lita, protecting the village, and navigating complex social dynamics had taught him lessons that would stay with him forever. He felt a quiet pride, not in dominance or authority, but in his ability to contribute meaningfully to a community he had once only observed from the outside. The women, too, were evolving. They had initially been cautious, protective of their late husband's legacy and unsure of Jake's intentions. But over time, they saw his sincerity, his patience, and his commitment. Maria appreciated his willingness to learn and honor the traditions, while Lita admired his courage and adaptability. Together, they had weathered crises, faced challenges, and built trust. Their relationships had become a true partnership, grounded in respect, shared experience, and understanding. One afternoon, Jake and the women walked to a nearby hill overlooking the village. The sun was warm, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. They paused to take in the view, reflecting on how far they had come. "We've faced so much," Maria said softly, "and yet we are still here, stronger than before." Lita nodded, adding, "It's not just survival, it's about living, learning, and growing together." Jake felt a deep sense of connection, realizing that their journey was not just about challenges, but about the creation of something lasting, a life built on trust, respect, and mutual care. The village, too, had changed. The villagers recognized the strength and commitment of Jake, Maria, and Lita. They saw how the trio had navigated crises, maintained harmony, and ensured the well-being of the community. Jake's presence was no longer questioned. He was accepted as a part of the village, a bridge between the old ways and the new challenges. Maria and Lita's confidence in him reinforced this acceptance, showing that their trust and partnership were genuine and earned. During this period, Jake also began to see the deeper emotional connections that had formed. He realized that caring for someone went beyond physical protection or daily tasks. It involved empathy, understanding, and shared experience. He began to anticipate the needs of Maria and Lita, not just in chores or safety, but in emotional support and companionship. They, in turn, supported him in moments of doubt, offering guidance, reassurance, and understanding. Their relationships had evolved into a profound bond, one that transcended the initial circumstances that had brought them together. As weeks turned into months, Jake reflected on the journey so far. The challenges they had faced, the harsh winter, illnesses, external threats, and the skepticism of the villagers, had not only tested them, but had also brought them closer. He understood now that true strength was not measured by solitude or physical endurance, but by the ability to care, connect, and act with integrity. Maria and Lita had taught him lessons about patience, wisdom, and partnership that no amount of frontier experience could have provided. One evening, as the village settled into quiet, Jake sat by the fire with Maria and Lita. The sky was filled with stars, and the air was crisp and still. They spoke of the past months, of the hardships and triumphs, and of the future they hoped to build together. Jake felt a profound sense of gratitude for the trust of the women, for the acceptance of the villagers, and for the lessons he had learned. He understood that life's true value was found not in freedom alone, but in connection, responsibility, and the bonds we form with others. By the end of this transformative period, Jake had become a different man. The challenges had shaped him, strengthened him, and deepened his understanding of life. Maria and Lita were no longer simply the women he cared for. They were partners, teachers, and friends. Together, they had navigated trials that would have overwhelmed most, emerging stronger, wiser, and more united. Their partnership had become a source of stability, love, and mutual respect, creating a foundation that would support the village and each other for years to come. As Jake looked out over the village one quiet morning, he realized how far he had come. He had arrived as a stranger, a wandering cowboy with no ties, and had been entrusted with a responsibility that seemed impossible. Yet through patience, perseverance, and the guidance of Maria and Lita, he had grown into someone capable of leadership, empathy, and deep human connection. Life in the village was no longer a challenge to survive. It was an opportunity to thrive, to build, and to honor the trust that had been placed in him. The events of this period left a lasting mark on Jake, Maria, and Lita. They had faced adversity, navigated uncertainty, and grown together in ways that words could not fully capture. The lessons they had learned, the value of partnership, the importance of empathy, and the power of trust would shape the rest of their lives. And as they continued to move forward, they knew that whatever challenges awaited, they would face them together, bound by shared experience, respect, and the courage to embrace life as it came. Life in the village had become a rhythm, a harmony of work, learning, and companionship. Jake, Maria, and Lita had grown inseparable, their lives intertwined through shared challenges and triumphs. Jake was no longer just a wandering cowboy. He was a protector, a partner, and a valued member of a community that had become his home. Yet the story of their journey was far from over. The final chapter was not about conflict or struggle. It was about understanding, growth, and the realization of what they had built together. The seasons continued to change, each bringing its own lessons. Spring arrived with gentle rains that nourished the earth and renewed the fields. Jake worked alongside Maria and Lita to plant seeds for crops, ensuring that the village would have enough food for the months ahead. He had learned much from the women, not only about farming but also about patience and timing. Every action had a purpose, and every decision mattered. Jake understood that his role was no longer temporary. He was part of the future of the village. As the crops grew, Jake spent time teaching the younger villagers skills he had learned as a cowboy, riding, tracking, and observing the land. Maria and Lita complemented his teachings with lessons about their traditions, culture, and the wisdom passed down from generations. Together, they provided a holistic education, balancing practical survival skills with lessons in respect, community, and empathy. The villagers thrived under their guidance, and Jake felt a sense of pride he had never known before. He was no longer alone. He had a purpose, a family, and a community to protect and nurture. The women also grew in confidence and strength. Maria became a respected advisor among the villagers, her calm wisdom helping to resolve disputes and guide important decisions. Lita's intelligence and courage shone in practical matters, from managing resources to teaching the children how to navigate the land safely. Jake admired their abilities, understanding that the late leader's trust in him had been wise. They were not just caretakers, they were pillars of the community, and together, the three of them had become a team capable of facing any challenge. One day, news came from a neighboring village about potential threats to the land and resources. Jake, Maria, and Lita immediately took steps to protect their community. They organized patrols, secured food stores, and prepared the villagers for any eventuality. Yet, this time, Jake acted with a calm confidence born from experience and trust. He was no longer the uncertain cowboy who had first arrived. He was a leader, one who had learned from failure, observation, and the guidance of those around him. The village looked to him not with skepticism, but with faith in his abilities and judgment. Despite these responsibilities, Jake never lost sight of the deeper connections he had formed. He spent time with Maria and Lita outside of work, sharing meals, storytelling, and quiet moments of companionship. They laughed together, reminisced about past adventures, and dreamed about the future. Jake realized that life's true wealth was not in possessions or power, but in the bonds of trust, respect, and shared experience. Maria and Lita had become not just part of his life, but essential to it, guides, friends, and partners in a journey that had changed all of them forever. As the months passed, Jake reflected on how much he had changed. The cowboy who had wandered alone across the plains had learned lessons that no solitary life could have taught him. He had learned patience in the face of challenge, humility in the face of doubt, and courage in the face of responsibility. He had discovered the value of connection, the importance of empathy, and the strength that comes from working together toward a common goal. Life in the village had transformed him, and he felt a deep gratitude for the trust that had been placed in him. One quiet evening, Jake walked to the edge of the village, overlooking the fields and the hills beyond. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the land. Maria and Lita joined him, and together they observed the village thriving after months of effort. Children ran and played, elders conversed with young adults, and the air was filled with a sense of peace and security. Jake felt a deep satisfaction, realizing that the trials, lessons, and shared experiences had led to this moment. A community strong, united, and full of life. The women spoke softly, sharing their reflections on the journey so far. Maria said, "We have faced so many challenges, yet here we are stronger and wiser." Lita added, "It is not just about surviving, but about living, learning, and growing together." Jake nodded, understanding the depth of their words. He realized that what they had built was more than a home. It was a life full of purpose, connection, and meaning. He felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not for personal glory, but for the lives he had helped shape alongside Maria and Lita. Together, they made plans for the future. Jake proposed teaching more children about the land and the skills necessary for survival, while Maria suggested preserving stories and traditions for future generations. Lita focused on strengthening the community's organization and resource management. They worked as a team, balancing ideas, responsibilities, and dreams. Jake marveled at how far they had come, from a stranger thrust into an impossible responsibility to a trio of leaders guiding a thriving village. The sense of unity was palpable, and Jake knew that this bond would endure for years to come. Over time, the villagers fully embraced Jake. They no longer saw him as an outsider, but as a trusted member of their community. His partnership with Maria and Lita was admired and respected, and the legacy of the late leader was honored through their care and leadership. Jake understood that true leadership was not about authority or control. It was about empathy, trust, and the courage to act responsibly. He felt proud, not in arrogance, but in the knowledge that he had contributed meaningfully to the lives of those around him. Life was not without moments of reflection and personal growth. Jake often thought about his life before the village, the endless plains he had crossed, and the solitude he had cherished. Yet he realized that while freedom had been valuable, it had been incomplete. Connection, trust, and shared responsibility brought a depth to life that he had never known. Maria and Lita had shown him the importance of partnership, the value of wisdom, and the strength of compassion. Together, they had built a life richer than any frontier adventure could have offered. One morning, a festival was held in the village to celebrate the successful harvest. The villagers gathered, singing, dancing, and sharing food. Jake, Maria, and Lita stood at the center, watching with pride and joy. Children ran to greet them, elders offered words of thanks, and laughter filled the air. It was a moment of unity, a testament to their shared efforts and the bonds they had formed. Jake felt a deep sense of belonging, understanding that he was no longer just a participant in life. He was a creator of it, helping to shape a community full of hope and resilience. As the festival continued, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the day he had met the dying Apache leader, the moment he had been entrusted with a responsibility that had seemed impossible. He thought of the early days of hesitation and doubt, of learning, failing, and trying again. He remembered the harsh winters, the illnesses, and the external threats. But most of all, he remembered the moments of connection, the shared laughter, the lessons, and the growth. Each step had led to this, an enduring life full of meaning, trust, and purpose. Maria and Lita approached Jake as the sun set, their faces reflecting warmth and understanding. They spoke of their gratitude, not just for his actions, but for his heart, his patience, and his willingness to grow alongside them. Jake, in turn, expressed his gratitude for their guidance, support, and trust. In that moment, the three of them understood that what they had built together was more than a family or a community. It was a bond that would endure beyond challenges, seasons, or changes in life. In the days that followed, Jake continued to work alongside the women, guiding, teaching, and learning. He helped the village plan for future seasons, assisted with ceremonies, and nurtured the children. The bond they shared strengthened with each passing day, rooted in trust, respect, and shared experience. Jake realized that the life he had inherited was not a burden, but a gift, a chance to grow, to connect, and to make a meaningful impact. Years later, Jake looked back on his journey with a sense of peace and fulfillment. The cowboy who had once wandered alone had found a home, a purpose, and enduring relationships. Maria and Lita thrived, respected and loved by the community, their wisdom and courage guiding the village forward. Jake understood that life was not measured by solitude or freedom alone, but by the connections we form, the lives we touch, and the trust we honor. The inheritance he had received had transformed him, showing that responsibility, respect, and care could create a life far richer than any he had imagined. And so, the story of Jake, Maria, and Lita became a tale of courage, partnership, and growth. What had begun as an unexpected responsibility evolved into a life full of meaning. The village thrived under their guidance, relationships deepened, and the legacy of the late leader was honored in ways that were both practical and heartfelt. Through challenges, trust, and shared effort, they had created a life that was not only sustainable but full of love, respect, and hope. Jake, standing on a hill overlooking the village at the close of another day, smiled quietly. He had arrived as a stranger, and yet he had become part of something much larger than himself. Through patience, courage, and the guidance of Maria and Lita, he had learned the true meaning of responsibility, partnership, and human connection. Life in the village had transformed him, showing that the greatest adventures are not always those that happen in isolation, but those that are shared, nurtured, and built together.